Fallout Equestria the Chrysalis, Chapter 10, Part 3. Black insectoid forms chased colorful ponies through the morning sky. I'd been making another attempt at reading when Starlight's faint gasp drew my attention, first to her, then up in the direction that she was looking. I stumbled at the sight, my gut lurching in shock. They were descending rapidly, swerving around in corkscrew patterns. I couldn't even guess at the distance, half a mile at most. It was far enough that I could only make out the most vague of details. There was a blue-green blob and a yellow blob, the rapid beating of their wings only faintly visible as a vague suggestion of motion at their sides. Behind them flew two black forms, swerving and turning to track the colorful ponies before them, with the light glinting off their carapaces. And I stared, mouth hanging open as I watched, desperately trying to shake myself from the shock and decide what to do about it. I was not surprised, though, perhaps a touch concerned, when the black forms began to fire magic at the ponies that they chased. I was surprised, however, when they turned out not to be bolts of green, but sharp lines of pink. As they flew closer, I could pick out the hint of amber color of the black figure's eyes, and the thick tail trailing behind them. I let out a breath that I had held, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. They were just armored ponies. Given the survival of the Raptors and Thunderheads, I wasn't even surprised to see the now ancient Pegasus power armors in action. I was only worried that these might be members of the enclave that Dusty had mentioned, but while I couldn't be concerned how accurate his information was, it still painted a very negative picture of them. Seeing a pair of power-armored Pegasi chasing a pair of apparently unarmed ponies certainly lends credence to Dusty's claims. Dusty had stopped beside me, his binoculars held up to his eyes. Guess that must be the enclave, chasing after some of their own? One of the pink beams struck the yellow pony. That Pegasus flared pink for a moment, casting off trailing embers as the former pony burnt away like a disintegrating meteor. The blue-green Pegasus swerved, narrowly evading a similar fate. The pops of the magical energy weapon's discharge echoed across the wasteland a couple seconds later. The sound turned soft by the distance. Oh, shit, Starlight murmured, lowering her lancer scope to look wide-eyed at the scattering pink embers. Then, her expression hardened and she raised her weapon again. Dusty shot an alarmed look her way, mouth opening to give a warning, but it never came. He stopped himself, then turned, looking back to the sky. I heard a soft exhale of Starlight's breath. In the following silence, another pink beam found the blue-green Pegasus, turning the pony's swerving dive into an uncontrolled plummet. An instant later, that shot was answered by the hissing crack of Starlight's lancer, its crimson beam slicing through the air and armor alike. One of the armored ponies tumbled wildly, scattering glowing motes of red from whatever part of the magic had just been incinerated. The other dark figure veered off sharply and pulled out of its dive. I could just make out the amber of the armored goggles as the pony searched for the source of the shot that had felled their companion. Starlight stared grimly down her scope, her magic already opening the chamber at the weapon's rear. She continued to track the remaining Pegasus. He arced around and began to dive again, aimed roughly in our direction and closing rapidly, while she swapped out the crystals and sealed her weapon again. A moment later, she fired. The red beam struck the Pegasus in the chest, sending him tumbling. It only lasted a moment before the pony stabilized, arching up again and beating its wings hard to get distance. Son of a bitch! Starlight snapped, and started to reload her rifle again. She grit her teeth, muttering under her breath as she tracked the pony's evasive maneuvering. Oh, hell no. You're not getting away with that, you... The chamber slammed shut. The magic lashed out, striking the fleeing pony's side with a burst of glowing embers and burning feathers. Ha! Starlight shouted, pumping a hoof into the air in celebration and grinning. That's what you get! The armored pony's momentum carried him up for another second before gravity reasserted itself, and he fell towards the earth below. His legs flailed, the remaining wing flapping wildly as he tried to slow his descent. Starlight's victorious grin rapidly wilted as she watched the pony plummeting through the air. For several seconds, she seemed frozen. Then she blinked and started through the motions of reloading her lancer. By the time she had closed the chamber again, the pony had fallen behind a hill and out of sight. Starlight continued to stare, her ears drooping. Finally, she turned away, her voice quiet and subdued. Come on. Let's go. I moved up to her side, intending to comfort her. I didn't get the chance as she cut me off before I could just speak. I know, she said, giving a faint, wry smile that died off a moment later.
I really didn't mean for that to go quite the way it did.
She looked off to the side, towards the hill the falling pony had disappeared behind.
Seems like such a horrible way to go.
I nearly winced when Sickle snorted, already anticipating her nastiness.
That was, what, 10 seconds? You ain't seen shit if you think that was a bad way to go.
Starlight's jaw tightened as she shot a glare back to Sickle, lacing her words with a nearly toxic amount of sarcasm.
Gee, thanks. That helps so much.
Sickle sneered back.
Anytime, Runt.
It was a good shot, Dusty said, his eyes still sweeping around the sky. But even a weapon as powerful as that can't always kill cleanly. Starlight bristled, but Dusty wasn't done. But you tried, and that's what matters. Those words knocked Starlight's anger right out of her, and she eyed him questioningly. He didn't look back, keeping his eyes scanning for further threats, which conveniently kept him from looking her way. Eventually, she looked away again, seemingly satisfied with Dusty's words.
So, what?
Sickle said, following along.
We ain't gonna find and loot them?
There was a momentary hitch in Starlight's step, as if quickly considering and rejecting the idea. No, Dusty said. If those were Enclave, they might have gotten a radio call out to any of their buddies. Even if they didn't, they're probably gonna have a superior officer that misses them soon. We want to get the hell out of here as quickly as possible. Sickle huffed quietly under her muzzle.
Run away from another fight, sure. Why not?
Fortunately, she didn't argue the point. We continued on, quickly slipping into silence once more. By evening, we arrived at Rust. Fatigue had become an issue, and not just for me. Starlight's limp had returned, both Silverline and Quicksilver were dragging their hooves, even Sickle lagged behind. Her hoof falls heavy as she trudged along behind us. And that ended when she downed another pill, which seemed to chase away her fatigue. Unfortunately, it also made her ever so slightly twitchy. The tip of her intact ear was just long enough to be visible, poking out of the small gap in her helmet, designed for such a purpose, and it flicked and twitched at even the slightest sound. After this second time, her head snapped around to stare at me for clipping a hoof against a rock, and therefore, making noise near her, I kept my distance. Only Dusty seemed to fare well, despite always being on guard. He kept sweeping his eyes around, watching out for any threats descending from the clouds, and the skies remained quiet, dull, and gray. It was a relief to see the armored walls of Rust again. Even Silverline gave a weak smile at the sight of safety, though her daughter kept her eyes down at her hooves. Unlike our sighs of relief, Sickle grumbled at the sight. She sat back heavily, popping open one of her cases to root around, eventually producing a couple more pills and a bottle of hard cider. She didn't even bother removing her muzzle, simply slapping the pills in between the bars and throwing her head back and lifting the bottle over her snout. She even managed to get most of the booze into her mouth. Despite having some concerns about mixing pharmaceuticals and alcohol, I remained silent. Starlight, as usual, did not.
How many drugs are you on anyway?
She asked, frowning at the larger mare.
What the fuck do you care?
Sickle replied, tipping the bottle back once more to make sure she got every last drop.
I only care because I have to be near you,
Starlight replied, with only a hint of grumbling.
Well, that and you're drugging up before we go into a town I kind of like, and I'd like the place to remain untrashed. Relatively speaking.
I silently added.
I ain't gonna trash the fucking place,
Sickle said, lowering her head and looking at Starlight. A bit of cider dripped from her chin and muzzle.
This little shithole ain't worth it, but I gotta go in there and get my bounty, and I sure as fuck ain't dealing with Steelshot's Brahmin shit sober.
As if to emphasize her point, she reared up on her hind legs and threw her bottle as hard as she could towards Rust. At that distance, it didn't even make it halfway, bouncing once off the ground before shattering on one of the train tracks leading to the town. When I looked back, I saw Sickle was looking at the inside of her muzzle, completely preoccupied with getting the last bits of cider. When we finally approached Rust, the welcome was somewhat less warm than our previous visit. Steelshot and his guards waited atop the walls while the gates remained shut. Some of them had their weapons out and resting against the walls. Up in the central tower of the town, I could see a pony crewing their heavy gun. I felt distinctly vulnerable as we walked closer. Or well, it wasn't until we were about 100 yards away when Steelshot visibly relaxed, letting his gun hang against its strap. Well, shit, he called out to us across the distance. If it was any pony other than you, Dusty, I would have thought Sickle there had started up a new gang. So what's got with you two traveling together? The other guards started to relax, as well as Dusty called back. Well, we needed an extra set of hooves to deal with a band of raiders. She's just here to collect the bounty. Ah, the usual then, Steelshot replied with a sense of weariness. Well, come on in. Might as well get this all over with. He waved a hoof, and soon the gate began to open. A minute later, and we were all inside. Steelshot and a few of his guards had to come down to greet us. Their angular armor, which had once struck me as heavy and tough, now seemed underwhelming when compared to Sickle's. Most of the guards looked wary. The armor-red mare I'd seen before watched Sickle with an intense glare. Well, it's good to see that you're still in one piece, Steelshot said as he stepped up to Dusty and they shook hooves. Was getting a bad feeling about your job and that little strange mare that hired you. So, everything went well then? Was a bit more than we expected, Dusty said, but nothing we couldn't handle. Anyway, the Sickle here has a bunch of ears to turn in, and the rest of us are gonna find that strange little mare to get our pay. Well, I'm sure you know where to find her, Steelshot said. Mustard said she's barely stepped hoof out of her room since you left. He then turned his attention to our newest traveling companions. And you've made some new friends. Have we met before, miss? When Silverline hesitated, Dusty was quick to cut in. They hired me to escort them home. We'll be setting out again in the morning, once we're done with our business here.
We were with the water caravan,
Silverline said. While every pony else looked at her, I noticed Dusty giving a faint grimace. It seems I was the only one to see it. Wait, you were? Steelshot asked, raising an eyebrow. Then, what are you doing? He halted abruptly, his eyes widening before looking to Dusty. Oh, no, you don't mean... I'm afraid so, Dusty said, slowly shaking his head. They got hit by the same band of raiders we came across. We came across these two, decided we'd make sure they get home safe and sound.
But...
Sickle's growling voice cut through the conversation.
The fuck did you just say?
Every pony's head snapped around to look at her, matching glares with the red guard mare. Despite the guard's own metal armor, it was a ridiculously mismatched face-off. That didn't seem to faze the red mare as she didn't give an inch. Instead, she sneered back to Sickle.
Nothing. That's fucking right,
Sickle said, advancing a step to press her face close to the other mare's.
That's all you fucking are, you little cunt, and you better remember it.
Steelshot stepped forward and raised the hoof, trying to intervene. Hey, now, calm here, there... Sickle wheeled around on him.
And fuck you too, Steel. How many raiders have I killed for you in your little fuck-stained town? You dumb cunts ought to be licking my fucking hooves for everything I've done for you. But every time I come in, it's nothing but bitching and moaning. How about you start showing a little fucking respect?
The red mare muttered loud enough to be sure we could all hear it.
How about you start acting in a way that deserves it?
Sickle turned back to her, baring her teeth as she growled.
Steel? You better get over here and shove your dick down this cunt's throat before she says something you're both gonna regret. Sickle!
Starlight called out with a warning tone to her voice, and Sickle turned on her.
Oh, fuck off, Star! Mind your own fucking business for a change!
Sickle shuddered, shaking her head for a moment as if she were shaking water out of her mane. Then, she turned back to the Red Guard mare. Then, she stopped, seeing Steelshot whispering to the mare. She continued to stare for several seconds, until the other mare gave a quiet snort and nodded to Steel. With a final glare Sickle's way, she turned and walked away with barely restrained rage. There, Steelshot said, doing his best to be calm and conciliatory. That better? We're all friends here, right? Sickle snorted, looking one last time at the guard mare, storming off into town before looking back to Steel.
Better for now.
Okay, good, Steelshot said, nodding. So, we've got business to talk then. Well, let's step into my office. We can get all this sorted out.
About fucking time,
Sickle muttered. This time it was Dusty who decided to speak out in warning. Sickle? Her head snapped around towards him, and I got the distinct impression that she was only a few words away from murdering some pony. I quickly lifted a hoof, placing it gently on Dusty's shoulder. The unexpected contact drew a start from him, cutting off what he was going to say next. He looked to me while I gave my best soft, gently concerned look in reply, while desperately hoping that he'd get the message.